If you're interested in self-development, how to build an amazing network, or how to craft a life that you desire, this podcast episode, Joey, I felt like brought all three of those and more. Our guest today comes from humble beginnings, somebody who started his career off door knocking, literally knocking on doors, created a six-figure income, but quickly after a year and a half decided that, man, that's not what financial freedom is. And he went on a road to figure out what that was. And it reminded me, Joey, some of the stuff that you talked about with your kind of transition as well.
Oh, yeah. No, this is like right up my alley because I saw myself in what Travis was saying. Man, I was on that commission hamster wheel. And he talked about the true freedom being able to go wherever you want, be with whoever you want, whenever you want. And the problem is when you're on 100% commission, that income is so like it grows and it becomes a big number, but it always is dependent, as our buddy Mark Podolsky says, it's solo economic dependence. It stops the minute that you quit knocking on those doors. And man, so financial freedom is the opposite. It's where you have that passive income that is covering those expenses. And that's what gives you the freedom that we're looking for. I'll tell you, if you're wanting to learn more about Travis, you can go to his website, travischappell.com, or he's built an amazing platform for podcasters, aspiring podcasters, or those that want to be guests on podcasts at Guestio.com. You can check it out as well.
Yeah. And as you're listening to this episode, you're going to probably come to this conclusion that there's something in your life that is knocking on doors for you. And you're going to try to figure out, how do I get out of that so that I can get really clear? And if you don't know, then we have a process that you can step into. You can either call one of our coaches and jump on a 15-minute free call at what'swellstreet.com/free call. Just get in our community. We've built a passport challenge that is designed to give you clarity. And I think that was my takeaway, Joey, after going through all of this self-development, building a network, crafting that life you desire. It all culminates through a crystal clear vision. So without any further ado, I want to share this episode with Travis Chappell with you. Let's jump in right now.
Welcome to the Wealth Without Wall Street podcast, your guide to understanding how to get out of the Wall Street rat race and start your own mailbox money lifestyle. Now, don't let these handsome Southern draws fool you. These financial minds are teaching our country to enhance savings, increase cash flow, and create passive income, all without the help of Wall Street. Are you ready to break through? Now here are your hosts, Russ Morgan and Joey Murray.
Welcome into the show, guys. Today we're in for a treat. The podcasting legend himself, Travis Chappell, is with us. Travis, so glad to have you, man.
Hey, what's up, Joey? What's up, Russ? How you guys doing?
Good, man. I know we've been chatting a lot. There's a lot of conversations we're going to kind of let everybody else in on. I want to start, though, with a moment in your life that I think probably was super pivotal. And it's super interesting to me for some reason, because I'm challenge oriented. One of your first jobs at a college was in door-to-door sales. So I've got to know, like, immediately, like, tell me about that first door that you walk up to and all the things that you were thinking as that was getting ready to unfold.
Yeah, for me, it was probably a little bit maybe more boring than you would imagine as what it would be for most door-to-door guys, because I grew up really religious. And we were knocking doors, inviting people to church when I was, 6, 8, 12, 15, like all the way up. We had what we called soul winning on Saturdays. And that was literally just going out, knocking on doors, inviting people to come to church. So when I was like 13, I was knocking on people's doors and asking them whether or not they knew for sure they were going to heaven and stuff like that, like really heavy topics, and leading people to Christ on their front porch, on the door. So when I started knocking doors in college for solar, which was my first door-to-door gig, knocking doors was, familiar to me. It was not like the act itself of knocking on doors was not anything that was scaring me. It was the only thing that I was thinking at the time was like, well, we'll see how this thing goes. Because at the time in college, everybody, the friends that I had that were knocking doors for this particular company were starting to become known in the college as the people who made money in college. And I had always had this desire to make more money, and I always had that kind of entrepreneurial itch. You know, I was selling stuff to kids in elementary school, and I was mowing lawns and starting landscaping stuff when I was in high school. And so in college, when I saw people were making like actually decent sized paychecks, which was even more out of place because we were at a purely ministerial college. So everybody there was going into ministry. And so when people started making checks that were bigger than the ones that they were going to get after they graduated and got a job, you know, it like intrigued me. So when I was walking up to that first door, I was just kind of like, oh, well, let's see if I can do this, you know? But it wasn't like the act of knocking the door itself was actually pretty familiar to me, but the sales gig was a little bit different. I was selling something different, you know?
No doubt. So, I mean, sharing the gospel is potentially a lot harder of a conversation than, hey, by the way, would you like me to install solar panels on top of your house?
Yeah, a little bit more intense, So the topic of conversation was a little bit easier going. The difference is I didn't get paid to bring people to church. So like there's no pressure in terms of production, you know, like you want to do a good job, but there's no real benchmarks you have to hit to, you know, pay bills or anything like that. So
no quotas.
Sales. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Right.
Only here on staff is their quotas, you know?
Yeah, we're given the Great Commission. We just don't get a commission for it, right? Like it's not
only in heaven. You get an extra brick on your mansion. You know what I mean?
The extra, yeah. You don't get that immediate gratification. Well, for everybody who hasn't followed your story, hasn't read your book, followed your podcast, give everybody kind of a 30,000 foot view.
Yeah, that's a lot of it right there. I grew up really religious, very fundamentalist Christian. Not that way anymore, but that's how I grew up. And I graduated kindergarten on the same campus I graduated college on. So everything, my entire life was lived on that 120 to 40 acre campus. It was expanding when we were there. So by the time I left, there was a 1,000 student college, a 7,000 member church, a 400 student K through 12. The school was private only, like there was no, it was closed enrollment. So only members of the church could send their kids to the school. So quite literally very much growing up in a bubble, there were no outside opinions allowed and things like that. So when I was going into college, the only thing on the table was going into ministry. So I went to the ministry on the same campus with all the same people and started doing door-to-door in college. And that's when I kind of realized that I really liked this business world and I really liked learning how to make a buck. And I really liked the leadership that came along with being a sales manager and things like that. And so by the time I graduated, it was kind of too late for me to decide to do something different in terms of schooling. Cause you know, I was 20, I got married before I graduated to my high school sweetheart. So we got married, I was 21. And then I graduated from college 5 months later, and then moved away for the first time. And by the time I moved away, I figured out I didn't want to be in ministry, didn't know what else to do because frankly, I was not qualified to do anything else. I had just graduated with a degree in Bible and church ministries. That was my double major in college, Bible and church ministries, which is already a pretty useless degree, like to go get a job with, except for the fact that mine was unaccredited. So it was an unaccredited Bible degree, which is basically just a worthless piece of paper and didn't really help me in terms of like what I was going to do with my career. And so the only thing I knew how to do at the time was door-to-door sales because that was the only thing that I did. I figured that was a better option than going and working a desk job, working for some person that I probably didn't like or respect and being told what to do and when to show up. Never liked being told what to do. So I figure I'll just do this 100% commission door-to-door sales thing because it seems like a better way to make money. So year one, made six figures and I thought I was rich. Quickly came to realize that six figures is basically nothing anymore. That was at age 22. And kind of a counterintuitive thing happened to me at that point, which was I made six figures at 22 in 20-hour work weeks, which you would think most 22-year-olds would be pretty elated at that point, and think they have everything figured out. And I was kind of like that, except I got to the point where I realized I didn't want to do that long term. And so now I am back to my useless Bible degree. It doesn't do anything for me. And this skill set of knocking on doors that is only translatable to knocking on more doors. And I know that I don't want to go knock doors. So now I have like the only two things I've ever done or am qualified to do. I know that I don't want to do them. And so basically now I got to start from scratch again and go figure something else out. And that was the first time in my life, really. It was just kind of a low point. Felt super lonely, not really sure what to do, where to go. Really felt like I was doing the work of a 15-year-old, except for that I was 23 and I had a mortgage and I had a wife and I had bills and responsibilities, and I couldn't just like go sleep on my mom's couch until I figured it out. So I dove headfirst into personal development for the first time in my life, watching YouTube videos, reading books, listening to audiobooks, listening to podcasts. And that was the first time I ever came across podcasts. After a while, I was just like, seems like this would be a really cool way to make a living if I could figure it out. And so started a podcast. No idea what I was doing, no idea how I'd make money, no idea how to monetize it, how I'd market it, nothing. Just started a show. And started investing heavily into myself, my knowledge, my skill sets, my learnings, start traveling places, going to conferences, meeting people, led to doing podcast coaching consulting for a lot of entrepreneurs. We helped launch a lot of shows for people because they wanted to know how my show was so successful. And then all of that led to basically where we are now, which is the software company. All the people that we helped in our coaching consulting business all seem to come across the same problems, which I don't know how to grow my show. I don't know how to monetize my show. I don't know how to get good guests. So we built a platform that helps people do all three of those things. And we raised some capital for that last year, about a $1.3 million pre-seed round, and have been building that ever since. And that brings us up to speed. So yeah, it's been a crazy, crazy few years.
Wow. That is a crazy, kind of like fast forward. I mean, there's a lot of things that we can unpack from the point where you decided I'm going to launch this podcast and then where that led from there. But there's kind of three things that, as Russ and I were talking about this online and thinking about you, that you really focused on self-development that led to where you're at right now. Yeah. And I think as we help people launch into the inner circle and other things, we're the main thing we say is investing in yourself is the number one place that you can start.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about that journey prior to the podcast. Like, you dove into this self-development stuff. Like, what was it about that kind of launched you into this path?
My mind started to change for the first time in my life. Like I said, I grew up in a bubble. It was very dogmatic that everything that I believed I held to be 100% truth, and started getting through life and realizing that there's almost no things that are 100% true. Very few things that are black and white. A lot of things are gray, and a lot of it's just trying to figure out how to be a good human during the process. And I figured the best way that I can wrap my head around what that means is trying to be more self-aware, and then trying to fill in the gaps of all the things that I don't know or understand. And that led me directly into more personal development, more books. The more that I learned, the more that I wanted to learn. The more that I learned, the more I realized I didn't know anything, and forced me to continue educating myself on those things. But it really came down to the self-awareness that first of all, the self-awareness of what I wanted out of life. I think a lot of people skip that step and then wonder why they're unhappy at age 50 because they've been working their whole life trying to please other people. And so the first thing I think was just becoming self-aware about what I wanted to get out of life and what success meant for me, because I think that it's a fluid definition depending on the person that you're talking to. And once I figured that out, it was very much like, well, I know that I want to get there, but I have no idea how to. I don't know what path that is to get me to the destination that I want to be. And, but other people have already been there. Other people are there. So I should probably go get to know some of those people and see how they got to where they are, which fed directly, obviously, into the podcast and made me want to continue reaching out to the best guests that I possibly could so that I could figure out how they got out of the situation that they were in to the place where they wanted to be.
This podcast is amazing, almost too amazing, Russ. There's too many ideas, and I don't know where to get started creating passive income.
Well, here's the thing, Joey. I think one of the things you need to consider in that statement is, what is it costing you to not know? What is it costing you not to take action? I love the statement that says you don't have to be great to start. You just have to start to be great.
if you're struggling on where to start, you have to know what type of investor you are. Know your investor DNA. And if you want to learn more about this, you can join us in our Passport Challenge at wealthwithoutwallstreet.com/passport. Get started today.
So what was one of those like interviews that you had that really opened your mind to something? Or you mentioned maybe it was an interview, maybe it was a book, but what was one of those moments that you can look back on and say that was pivotal?
I don't know if I can remember a specific interview like that, because there's so many that come to mind that taught me a lot of things. But if I went back to the decision to start a podcast, that was all basically done through listening to a podcast. And that particular podcaster was a podcast educator. And I saw, again, to me, it was like, I saw his story. I saw that he was in a place where he didn't want to be. And then he used this vehicle to get him to the place where he wanted to be. And that was interesting to me because that offered me at least some sort of a path that I could continue to take steps down in the meantime. And so that led me to starting my own show. And then starting my own show was like the beginning point of my entire professional development career up to this point. Everything has been a stem off of the podcast. Almost all of the dollars that we've brought in revenue in the last few years have been some way directed to the podcast. The masterminds that I've joined, the people that I've connected to, the lessons that I've learned, the knowledge I've gained, almost all of it can be at least some way directed back to the show that I started and the shows that I've been on or the shows that I've listened to.
Well, and Travis, I'm going to mention something you just pointed out earlier, was that once you got clear on what success looked like for you, like what was it that you're actually trying to become, or what were you wanting to do with your time, all of a sudden then it left you with, okay, I'm clear on that. Now I have to find my path. The funny thing is literally our whole process, we call it the GPS process. You have to have your goal, which is your vision of financial freedom. It's our passport challenge that we put people through. And then it leads directly into what we call the Pathfinder. So it's like you're literally spitting back to us exactly the same process. Yeah. And it's the vehicle then that leads you to what that goal or that vision was. In your case, it was podcasting. For the people that are in our community, they're land flipping, they're doing short-term rentals, they're buying real estate, they're doing all these other vehicles to get them to what that vision looked like. Talk a little bit, if you can remember back to that time when you got clarity, what was the life that you were trying to create? Because you may already be there, or you may be still in process, but what was that vision that you were trying to create?
Yeah, still in the process. And the answer is complete and true freedom was always the vision that I had. It was like, yeah, door to door was cool and I made decent money and I was fairly flexible in my schedule. I just it was 100% commission. So I could knock whenever I wanted to, but if I didn't knock, I didn't make any money. So I'd knock 3 or 4 hours a day. I was fairly flexible, but if I left and went out of country for a week, I didn't make any money when I was gone, and I had to come back and work harder before I left so that I could make up for that week of non-production so that I could leave. And so that wasn't really time freedom for me. To me, true freedom is all of the types of freedoms. It's financial freedom, it's time freedom, and it's location freedom. And some things offer one of those things. Some things offer a combination of those things, but not all 3 of them. And I wanted to be able to find all 3 of those things. Can I go wherever I want, whenever I want, and do whatever I want with whoever I want? And the answer was no, and it still is. And it's not, and in some ways you'll never really get away from some of that, especially if you have family responsibilities and things like that. But at least that was the picture that I wanted for my life, and that's still kind of what I'm working toward. And that was what made me want to take huge leaps into investing into myself, by the way, as well, because I think that everybody should invest in themselves, but maybe not to the tune that I invested in myself, because I understood the path that I was taking was going to be completely different than most people's paths. It wasn't in my plans to go get a job that paid me $250,000 a year and then save 10 grand a month and then put it in this mutual fund and then let it pay me passive income. And then when I'm, I can retire when I'm 45 instead of 65. That wasn't really my plan. My plan was like make as much as I possibly can doing something crazy, and then do whatever I want after that. So I knew that if I was going to go that path, it was going to be a lot more difficult, a lot more stressful. But it would also get me to my goal faster and allow me to do the things I wanted to do faster. And if that were the case, I was going to have to go learn a bunch of stuff that I had no idea how to do, because the current skill set, that I had at the time was nowhere near capable to get me to the point where I wanted to be.
How many iterations of that goal did you have? Like, I'm just thinking of where you were and where you came from, right? So there probably wasn't a lot of entrepreneurs around you growing up. It doesn't sound like. So
Zero.
how did you craft that plan? Was there just someone out there or 2 or 3 people out there that you're like, I kind of like what they're doing, and that allowed you to then start running after it? Or tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, that was basically exactly it. It was like, at first it was like, the reason I got into podcasting was I liked the freedom that came along with it. And I liked that you could talk to people. I had zero plans of becoming like an online marketer or starting a software business or building a funnel or running a webinar. I had no intention of doing any of that stuff. The only thing I wanted to do was start a podcast and get sponsors and make money. And that's what I saw. This particular mentor was John Lee Dumas. And I knew that he was making like 50, 60 grand a month just on sponsorships. And I was like, well, I mean, if I get to that, then I don't need all the other stuff. Like at the time, that was all my brain was at, I was happy making 10 to 15 grand a month knocking doors, so I wasn't thinking about 100K a month, 200K a month, 500K a month, or exiting a business or multiples or valuations. I wasn't thinking about any of that stuff. I was just thinking like, what's a cool way to make revenue that allows me to have freedom and also, buy the stuff that I want to buy, travel where I want to travel, take care of my family and my friends, and live a good life. So that was version 1, was just have a podcast, make money on sponsors. That's it.
Gotcha. Well, and you've mentioned this, but previously with us about your network. I mean, the whole reason you were able to build Guestio, this platform, is because you created a podcast that brought in amazing guests, and now that's your network. And so talk a little bit about the value of that for someone who I'm talking to the person right now who's listening, who's running on the treadmill, driving down the highway, and they're going to a job that they don't love. And they're like nodding their head the whole time. Travis, yes, I do not want to knock doors. They may not be knocking doors that they're doing, but they don't want to do whatever that is. But they don't see themselves as a podcaster yet, right? They don't see the point. They don't see a connection. Talk about the value of that, building that network, and what that might look like for that person who is listening to you right now saying, yes, I want out of this prison.
Sure. I'm a huge believer in, if you don't have the answer or the roadmap to getting where you want to go, somebody else already has it. Like you don't have to start from scratch. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to be a genius. You don't have to create the next Facebook in order to get to the point where you want to be. You just got to go find other people who have been where you are and then are currently where you want to go, and be around those people. And so that is a sometimes difficult proposition if you're starting like I was, which is literally from scratch, right? Like when I left that world I grew up in, none of the people followed me. Like I had some friends, and still to this day, probably 2 or 3 of my best friends I've known since we were 3 years old, and we're more like brothers than friends at this point. But the majority of the people, vast majority of the people there, were basically like, all right, good luck. You don't want to do the things that we want you to do. Like we're not going to throw shade at you, but we're also not going to help you. So it was literally starting my entire community of people over from scratch when I started my show. And, the reason that I recommend podcasting as a vehicle for that is that it's the perfect way to get your foot in the door with almost anybody that you want to connect with, talk to, or have a conversation with. If you're just like going to try to pick somebody's brain, you know what I mean? Or you want to get a virtual cup of coffee or a real cup of coffee, like people are busy. If the person that you're reaching out to is worth getting in front of, they're probably not going to be somebody that just has some free time to go grab some lunch with a random person who DM'd them on Instagram. That's probably not going to be a winning formula for you. So podcasting unintentionally, by the way. When I started it, it wasn't about that, but I quickly started to realize that, like, wow, I remember, I'll never forget, there was 2 people when I was first starting my show that I wanted to bring onto my show. And I reached out to them, and I thought it was going to be like a smaller or easier ask. And so I asked them for like 2 to 3 minutes of their time on a phone call, because I wanted to ask them a quick question. I was like, hey, I got a quick question. I'm doing this stuff. I just want to ask you one quick question. Do you think we could have like 3 minutes on a phone call? Both of them replied with a no. One of them was just like, I just don't have time for that. The other one was like, yeah, I got people in my mastermind that paid me $30,000 a year to jump on phone calls with me at any time. So it wouldn't be fair to them if I just did it for some random person. Hope you understand, and it was just like, okay, no, totally understand. And then me being, persistent door-to-door sales guy, I must have said something. It was so long ago now, I don't quite remember. They either saw that I was a podcaster, like in my email signature, or I said something about it at that point. Like, well, maybe at some point in the future, we'd love to bring you on the podcast or something. And without hesitation, both of them said yes. So I was like, wait. So this person's going to say no to me for a 3-minute phone call where I can ask them one question and nobody in the world has to even know that it took place. They're going to say no to that. But then they're going to say yes to a 30, 45-minute podcast interview where I could ask them any question I want for that amount of time, and I can share that message with my audience and provide more value to them, as well as my own personal brand, because I get to associate myself with these like legends in this space. This is mind-blowing to me. And that was like an aha moment for me, where I was just like, wow. Well, this is like, it's game over, and that's that from that point on became just that vehicle for me to be able to have conversations with people that wouldn't give me the time of day otherwise. And the more valuable my show became, the higher level people I could talk to, because more and more people were willing to give me the time of day because they actually wanted to be on my show at that point. And then that's, just grown and spread from there.
Well, I mean, what you're hitting on is we've got to be building networks and mentorships, masterminds, meetups, podcasting. All of these are opportunities for us to build that network. Joey and I wouldn't have a monthly passive income report if it wasn't for podcasting. You mentioned John Lee Dumas a second ago. Joey and I were at Podcast Movement in Philadelphia, right, Joey? And we met John Lee Dumas at an event. Spent a little time with him and Kate. And next thing you know, it's like, I didn't know who John Lee Dumas was. To be honest, he was not on my radar because we're just in completely different spaces.
Sure.
But because of, getting to connect with him, listening to him talk, I was inspired by it, went and looked up his stuff. There I see him posting what you were just talking about, all the different passive income reports that he had on his podcast. A little bit later, we ran in to Pat Flynn at the same event. And I'm like super interested by what he's doing. I go into his website. He's got a passive income report. Yeah. All of these things became something I was like, man, how do we emulate what they're doing? Because for us, that's a concept. So we actually built our own passive income report to post to the world because of that, right?
Nice.
So you never know where these mentorships and masterminds are going to lead to. Travis, you mentioned a second ago, and I want to just touch on this because obviously we're running out of time here. But the 3 takeaways I've seen is self-development so vital, building your network, creating and crafting a life that you desire. What's on the horizon for you? What are those things that you're striving for right now that maybe, as you said, unattainable, but at the end of the day, that's what you have marked down, whether it's for 2022 or your 3-year goals?
Yeah, for me, again, it comes down to the freedom thing. So if you want more tangibles, we have always lived kind of below our means. So that's just frankly how I was also raised, but also, I realized a long time ago that delayed gratification is one of the only true common denominators to all successful people. And if I wanted to be successful, I should probably try to do some of that. So I never really splurged, never bought my dream car. I never bought a dream house, never spent, money on really anything, like I'm wearing $30 or $40 shoes that I bought like 2.5 years ago. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like those things don't really matter to me in the scope of everything else that I'm trying to accomplish. And so part of that, freedom I was talking about for me is to be able to not constrain myself as much with some of the things I'd like to splurge on. So the first thing for me is a house on land. for my family. I grew up on a couple acres. I don't like having neighbors. I would rather be by myself and have some acreage and kind of a ranch style property for my dogs to run around on, my kids to play on. I can, hit some golf balls in my backyard without hitting anybody else, and do some things like that. So that's on the horizon for us. And then in terms of our business, the software company is just front and center. We shut down a lot of our coaching consulting type stuff, our courses, because we're focusing really, really heavily into the software side of things now. And so the software company, that's where we've, they say you shouldn't put all your eggs in one basket, but currently that's kind of how it is. And done a couple of angel investments and stuff to also be thinking about the future. We are doing a house flip right now with my parents as well. And so, yeah, for me in the future, it's still, freedom is still like the number one thing. But now I have a couple of kids, so there's a deeper reason why I want that freedom. And it's not necessarily just tied to like me wanting to see the world and travel and do the things I want to do. It's very much tied to being with them and not having to be away from them all the time, in order to pay my bills and make money. I want to experience life with them, not after them. So there's a lot of those motivating factors, and those are some of the kind of tangible goals that we have.
Yeah. Well, when you have kids, you realize that money is irrelevant. One, they'll spend it all, but also that the time that we have with them is never coming back. And I could appreciate that answer, man. If somebody wants to connect with you, give us some places where somebody could find out what you're up to.
Yeah, best place is just my website, personal website, travischappell.com, CHAPPELL, travischappell.com. Basically everything I do is there. It's like kind of a hub, so you can see all my social links, catch me on. I do a lot more on Instagram these days than anything else, probably Instagram, TikTok, a little bit of Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, but more so Instagram. But you can find all my social links there. And then you can find my podcast there, Build Your Network. We're also launching a new podcast called Figuring It Out, to talk more about like life philosophy things with my wife and my producer. And then Guestio is the big thing. So if you want to get booked on more podcasts, or if you want to find better guests for your podcast or YouTube channel or blog or something like that, then Guestio is the marketplace that's going to help you figure that out. That's just at guestio.com, but you can also see that over at travischappell.com.
And Travis, just so I'm clear on that, somebody that doesn't have a show today, is Guestio still something that they could do to be booked on other people's shows? Is that
100%.
still? Okay.
Yep. Yeah, you can get booked on shows, or you can book guests for your show.
Awesome. Travis, this has been a real treat to have you here to share your story. Thank you for getting vulnerable with us about just how you've gotten to where you're at and the success you're having. I think it's inspiring. If you're listening to this is a real possibility for you as well, to create the life that you desire. And that's why we want to bring people like Travis on here to inspire you to do that. Thanks as always for being a part of this show, and we will catch you on the next episode.
This has been the Wealth Without Wall Street podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to the show to break free of the Wall Street mindset and begin building wealth on your own terms in places you understand, so that your wealth will never run dry. See you next episode.